Hi, everybody. Welcome to San Francisco. I'm so excited to be here and to share with you how you can accelerate your transformation at your organizations. My name is Dani Netto, and I'm a worldwide EEBA lead. You also learned today what's the connection between cowbells, parties, and successful migrations. But you have to stick around to learn about that. So why did we even go and create an acceleration methodology? Over the years, customers' questions have moved from what do I do to how do I do it. The what is usually more technology-centric, and the steps to go to cloud and the technology is a lot better known right now than the how. The how really involves process, people, and cultural changes. So what kind of questions are customers asking? How do I transform my organization? How do I change from one-way door decisions to two-way door decisions? How do I make it more agile? And how do I bring value faster? Those are the types of questions that customers are asking us. Well, the data has shown, data that customers and your peers have given us, that over 70% of the friction points that customers are having are non-technical. They're related to people, processes, and culture. Only about 30% are really technology-oriented. So take a quick pick at these friction points. Those are some of the friction points that we see over and over again. And please raise your hand if at least one of them resonates you've seen at your customers or you've seen in your own organization. Yeah, no, I hear you. Every organization gets some kind of those friction points at some point in their journey. So what makes it hard? We identified some common characteristics that make those friction points, and it's hard to change in organizations. Let's start with one, a common one: inconsistent communication across departments, across silos. Customers see that a lot in their especially larger enterprises. So it causes misalignment and challenges to get alignment across stakeholders. And it also creates a challenge to get a vision and the strategy of cloud aligned across all the cross-functional teams and across the whole enterprise. So let's talk about one customer that, just like we said, they also had some of these challenges. SAP Concur. I mean, I don't think SAP Concur needs introductions. Most of us use it or have used it, but they are an expense and travel software company, management services. And they had been already in the journey for cloud for about 4 years, and they didn't have much to show for it. There was a lot of finger pointing. Security said that they can do it. Operations didn't give security the requirement. Product didn't prioritize it, etc., etc. They couldn't show a lot of progress, and what happened was they got a very large contract with a public sector. This was a US government contract that had very hard and strict requirements, compliance requirements, and had a deadline that they had to hit. They were concerned. I mean, the management, the leadership really didn't think that they would be able to make it. And if they didn't hit the deadline, they could lose the contract. So that was really a decision, forcing function for them to say, I think we need to do something differently here. So we had a really good relationship with SAP Concur, and then we proposed for them to use EEBA, our acceleration methodology. They were hesitant at first, but they knew that they needed to do something different. First, we asked them to bring the entire team, all the cross-functional teams, for an event, a 3-day event. We asked that we were going to have a party. Yes, you heard it right. We say a party, but let me put a parenthesis here. Party is a 3-day hands-on, immersive event to drive common outcomes across the cross-functional teams. They were a little hesitant, but they trusted us. And at the end, they went through 3 parties across different regions. During those 3 parties, they were able to deploy to production 19 applications. They were able to uncover 60 plus blockers and remove those blockers. And they had more than 150 cowbells. Yes, cowbells. What we do, we take partying very seriously. And the idea here is to have the team be able to celebrate the smaller accomplishments and the smaller successes towards that larger goal, and really help bring some excitement and change the culture. So they hit the deadline. They were able to deliver it and keep the contract. With that, they migrated 700 microservices in 3 months. Talk about acceleration here, right? One of the interesting things was to see and to hear from their leadership that it was really an eye-opening for them, because they really believed that they had a resource problem. They believed that the team didn't have the capability or the background or the experience. Maybe they needed more training, but that was not it at all. The team was capable, as it shows in the results that they had. In fact, just a few hours into the first party that they had, they identified a critical blocker in operations and security, a critical blocker in the process. And that's where they targeted and unblocked and resolved that. Now, SAP Concur has completely adopted the mechanism. They continue to leverage it as part of their delivery model. So I've talked about cowbells, parties, EEBA. So what is EEBA? EEBA is a methodology that we've created over the years based on all the best practices and success patterns that we've identified that works with customers. It hits 3 different levels of benefit. For leadership, they are challenged to deliver and transform the organization. It helps them remove leadership blockers, break the silos within the organization, and also create a working model to scale. And it's sustainable for them. At the management level, who are challenged to deliver results fast to the projects and specific initiatives, they are able to identify some friction points that are impeding adoption more easily. They're able to move from analysis to action, and they're able to deliver results and put a score on the board for their team very quickly. For builders, they love it because they're empowered to rethink things. They're empowered to work across the cross-functional teams, which usually they don't have a chance to even meet. They're able to focus on building and learn and have a really immersive hands-on experience. So how do we do that? What's different, right? We've talked about parties. Our approach, we're builders, right? And we wanted an approach that was very practical. but the specific success patterns and the recipe that makes it different from another hackathon or another workshop. Parties are 3-day, like I mentioned before, events where cross-functional teams, including decision makers and builders, come together to resolve and deliver some common outcome. It resolves technical and non-technical frictions, and also a lot of times it introduces the organization to a new way of working, a new way of collaborating, problem solving, and building. So there are 3 types of parties, kind of the core parties. Parties can be tailored to you, but those are the core parties that we have: the platform, migration, and modernization. Platform party focuses on hardening the landing zone and moving 2 or 3 applications to actually test the patterns and test and validate the landing zone. And it starts to adapt the operating model, the security rules for the cloud. The migration party focuses on actually migrating applications to production. You can have 3 to 5 or even more applications and migrate it to production within those 3 days. You also build automation, you build patterns that can be reused, all thinking at scale, and continue to adapt the operating model and adapt the security rules to scale now. The modernization party focuses on breaking down some monoliths to microservices, creating some native, cloud native patterns, and to containerize some applications, depending on what you're targeting. But all the different parties can be tailored, as I mentioned before, and the goal is to deliver specific business outcome at the end of it. So let me tell you about MDocs, another case study. And by the way, you can look both SAP, we have a recorded publicly where SAP talked about their success story at reInvent, and you could hear from the customer's voice their story. But also MDocs is a public case study in our website, so you can check it out. MDocs, similar to SAP, they were also having some challenges with a specific project. This project, they needed to create some new requirements, net new capabilities, and it was about an opportunity that would extend their business. They were 3 months behind schedule when we came in, and we proposed to help with EEBA. They not only delivered, but they delivered 25% in 25% of the time that was previously budgeted for. So talk about acceleration here. And so we talked about SAP, who was at risk. We talked about MDocs, who was behind schedule and needed acceleration. And both of them used EEBA. But what I would like to do today is to look under the hood of EEBA and share with you some of the success patterns that we'll use and it really the secret sauce to work, that you can take it with you and start to apply in your own organizations. And for that, I'm gonna call my colleague and friend, Scott Benz. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with the group of you here in San Francisco. My name is Scott Benz. I'm the product manager for EEBA, the product manager for experience-based accelerations and these parties that Danny just described. I'm in my 8th year here at AWS. It feels a lot faster than that. I've been on the team I'm on now for the last 4.5 years, almost since our beginning. I think our team formed maybe 5 or 6 months before I joined. Our team has been singularly focused on looking for blockers and friction points that customers were encountering time and time again as they migrated or modernized into AWS, and working through different mechanisms to see how we can help accelerate that. That's been our mission. So, we heard a little bit about Concur. They had missed 2 deadlines. They were stuck. They were on a trajectory. They were going to miss their 3rd milestone. They truly were at risk of not delivering for their customer. A pretty significant piece of work. I really do encourage you, you can look for Cameron's first-person description of that, recorded from a previous summit, talking about those challenges, talking about how it felt, talking about the origin, and how some of those things came to be, at least for SAP Concur. I find it really compelling because it's challenges and feelings that we see time and time again with so many different enterprises. So they employ this experience-based acceleration thing. They run a few of these parties. They have some immediate success, so they actually run 3 in pretty quick succession, and it puts them back on track and puts them in a position so they can successfully deliver that commitment for their end customer. We heard about Amdocs. They have a unique market opportunity. They come back and work through the plan of what it'll take to deliver on that. And that plan really isn't conducive to being successful. The timeline's not going to work. They need to accelerate. They apply these experience-based acceleration parties, and they're able to meet that timeline. They're literally able to compress in months of work down to days. So what was really happening? These are 2 examples of what has been for us a little over 100 customers the last couple years who've had similar challenges and we've been able to work with similar kinds of results. And so that's what I want to go into today. What's really happening when you peel this onion back? What are the elements that are working together? I want to give you a practical set of information and a practical level of visibility into how those things are working, so that as you go back to your office, if you find yourself with a need to accelerate or somewhat stuck, it can somewhat serve as a guide or give you some input on things to add into what you're doing. You could obviously reach out to your field teams or an AWS partner about how we do these things or how we can support you with these things. But let's walk away from today with that practical amount of information. So as Danny said, I'm going to get into the how. So I'm going to talk really about one success pattern because we think it's one collective of activities, one collective of elements all working together at the same time. I am going to break it down into 4 parts just to make it a little bit easier for us to go through together. But keep in mind all these things are happening at the same time. So let's hop into it. The first element is around sponsorship. You've probably heard from us, you might have heard in other types of venues, people will ask us, hey, what's a differentiator between customers that find themselves having great success in the cloud and others who are having less success or feel like they're struggling? And an answer you'll hear to that question is a big component of that is about leadership commitment, leadership alignment, and firm commitment to the scope of workload that's going to be migrated. So what does that mean in practical terms, alignment and commitment? I'll tell you what it means for us in these types of activities. Each of us, yourselves and us, can go sit with those leaders and have a fairly straightforward and almost simple conversation on what are the business drivers, what are the primary business initiatives for the corporation, and what's really the prioritized target business outcome that the enterprise wants to deliver. And so what are the IT goals that are associated with that? What's the strategy that's going to underpin that? That's going to bring together certain aspects of the tactics and the organizational capability. Maybe even talk a little bit about the KPIs that indicate how well we're doing on that today or that are going to show our progress over time. That's a pretty straightforward conversation. Alignment means removing the gaps of understanding that across the organization. In almost every engagement I've been part of over the last 4 years, we see gaps in that understanding, that alignment across an organization in different domains and north-south in an organization across different levels. And so alignment means resolving those gaps, sometimes easier said than done. Commitment's a bit straightforward, in that it's commitment to the scope, and there's no right or wrong answer about the scope. The scope for some is this particular pilot. A scope that we worked on was simply an application that served the inventory information for a reservation system, for a travel and hospitality reservation system. And the business outcome that was important, the business outcome that was relevant, was the user experience and that part of the engagement. And so that was the application scope. For others, it's maybe something more programmatic in exiting a data center and a large-scale exit of a data center. So it doesn't matter what that answer is, but again, it's removing those gaps and making sure everybody in the organization has a solid view of what that is. And I'm not talking about the entire company strategy and the entire IT strategy. Those are important things, and those are big, broad things for the organization to understand. But I'm talking about the one or two things that the executives want to accomplish that quarter or have for a goal that year. The next aspect is having aggressive top-down goals. For us, the goal in these parties is to migrate 3 to 5 applications in 3 days, or to modernize an equivalent set of workload or services or deconstructed monolithic application into cloud-native services into AWS in 3 days. That's our aggressive top-down goal. Having an aggressive top-down goal obviously does a lot to make really clear what the expectations are. It also brings focus. It also helps teams maybe start to work together. But we go after this for another reason. And I want to combine that with the final point you see here, which is starting without a plan. For sure, over the last few years, I've seen a fair number of customers stall or stop or wait because they're trying to figure out every last disposition of application that they have. What and how are they going to do with this particular application, as opposed to getting started with the things that they know. We absolutely see organizations stall out with that kind of mindset, when they have that kind of mindset. But we feel it's really important to get started without a plan, because the sooner you get started, the sooner you'll learn the last mile requirements. We're pretty firm on this point, because we see it time and time again. Until you go the last inch of the last mile, you won't truly understand those requirements. And so often something comes up that is going to be something you need to troubleshoot, something that you didn't think about or the team didn't think about and we need to work through. It doesn't matter if it's your very first application that you're just lifting and shifting over. We see a lot of times something comes up at that final moment. Or it doesn't matter if you've been working with AWS for a while and you're just working on the next tier of critical applications or really advanced services, but you're doing that for the first time, and then something comes up at the last minute. So one of the reasons to have this aggressive top-down goal to accomplish so much and to get started before you have a final plan is so you can accelerate those learnings and you can actually incorporate that into the final plan and actually have a better, more trustworthy business case or execution plan to work through. The last point, or I'll connect to sponsorship, is around skills and experience. I'm going to touch on this later in another part as well, but leadership really does have a role about working deliberately to put the teams, put the individuals on those teams in a place where they can build on those skills. Whether that's giving them the room and the space to prioritize. Maybe there's an aspect of funding. Maybe there's an aspect of an acknowledgement. But there's a key leadership role here because cloud skills is a critical path item. So let's talk about the next part. The next part is about how work is accomplished. It starts with really endeavoring to go do these aggressive things with one cross-functional team, an empowered team, a cross-functional team that has both representatives from all of the domains that possibly have a stake in what's going on, whether it's the business outcome, whether it's an aspect of security or operations and whatnot. But cross-functional in that you have doers, decision makers, influencers, all together. Everybody that you would need to collectively work through an end-to-end discovery and be able to make a decision there with all the things that are known. The next element is to have those teams work in a very agile-based and iterative fashion. Look, for most of the organizations that I've worked with, absolutely, they at least have a few of their software development teams, their application teams working in an agile manner. Some of those customers, all of the application teams. But for most, the surrounding teams, those surrounding domains are working at a different tempo. For some, that's security working at a different tempo. For others, that might be the cloud team or the cloud COE that might have some waterfall processes or just be on another tempo. Maybe there's a platform team. Maybe it's something that's adjacent, like HR or finance and how they're interacting. Sometimes leadership is somewhat disconnected from the tempo as well. So collectively, you want this entire group, and you bring this entire group through this agile way of working for these 3-day sprints, for the activity that you would put together. Next is to, in a very purposeful way, in terms of how you're working, collect data about how that work is going. Our reflex might be to say, absolutely, let's do that. Data's good. We've got information about the application, the performance before and the performance after. We're also collecting some data about the cost that's being spun off as these new services because we're dealing with them for the first time. Terrific. Collect that data. As you do the work, collect other data about how that work is occurring. I sat with some teams that were containerizing applications for the first time in this 3-day sprint. That was a big part of what they wanted to incorporate in their move in terms of bringing some additional capability to their organization. And so this was the first time they had teams containerizing existing applications. And you know what? We clock timed what it took for them to do these very first ones. They, of course, had a sense that this would get better over time or maybe more efficient over time, or certainly with the patterns we were going to develop and publish from this would get better over time. But we left that meeting replacing a benchmark that immediately seemed less relevant in the business case in terms of the macro view of the level of effort it was going to take. That's just one example. You really want to think about how to instrument all of that activity so that you can take those insights and those learnings and incorporate it. The next element in terms of how the work is accomplished is not always intuitive for the enterprises that we've worked with. Many of the enterprises we've worked with are world-class at managing existing processes. They're world-class at protecting the organization in an appropriate way from the big one-way door decisions in the past. Hopefully you've heard that term before from us. A one-way door decision is when you walk through, the doors behind you, you can't go back. So whatever you've walked into in terms of the cost, the effort, the resource commitment, you're really kind of stuck with for some time, right? And there are lots of terrific one-way door processes that have protected corporations for decades of those big decisions that you can't necessarily go back on. Fortunately, what all of us are working with here are really two-way door opportunities, doors you can step through if it's not right, if it's not ideal, we can turn around and go back without a big penalty, without a big continuing commitment. So it helps to look at the decisions you're making as you go through this and where things might seem difficult or insurmountable, breaking those down into decisions that seem more like a two-way door. And then importantly, allow these empowered cross-functional teams to adapt processes or create new processes. One of the first things that'll slow you down is if you have a one-way door process or governance and you try to apply that to a two-way door decision, will immediately slow it down from the capability you would otherwise have. So you need a different kind of process for that governance, obviously. The last element around how the work is accomplished is about it being sustainable. Our team worked on this for quite a while. It needs to be a working model that's really inviting for teams, rewarding for teams, and something that teams can do again and again. Not something that takes such a Herculean level of effort, it burns everybody out, and you really can't even mention it for 6 months. But something that the teams can repeat over and over if it's something that works. Part 3. Part 3 is about the cloud outcomes. This is the magic. Let's go deploy something. We're going to go deploy workload, whether it's modernized workload, or if it's a lift and shift, or if it's something in between. We're going to go deploy that in the environment. We're going to deliver that value as running workload in the cloud in that 3 days. Now, you want to pick something, obviously, that connects to all of that work we did in alignment, right? Something you can tie back to a specific business outcome that matters. Because if you're going to bring all these people together, let's work on something that matters. Let's pick something that's representative of the scope. That's very key. Sometimes there's a reflex with organizations to pick something very simple to just go through the process. You don't want to pick an application that says hello world when it's up and running. You really want something with the representative complexity, even if you're just starting. Another thing you want to incorporate as a purposeful outcome to go after our other critical path needs, or what we might call no regret items that are needed. What do I mean by no regret items? For some, a no regret item is they need to go build a landing zone because they're just getting started. So one way or the other, it doesn't matter what the scope is, they just need a landing zone. We just need a landing zone and something to work with. It doesn't matter how many things will eventually migrate, we need that. For others, it might be something like an on-prem API service and an integration with that API server that's on-prem, because in the fullness of time, that's really going to be integral to the architecture because that's not moving for a while. Let's include that. You really want to have those purposeful things that are meaningful to the organization. So at the end, you have that connection to a business impact, and you have things that are an asset for the organization as it moves forward. Now, I talked about how we learn the last mile when we finally go through the last inch, the last centimeter of that last mile. And things come up, and there's always an element of trial and error in almost all of these 3-day events that I've seen over the last 4.5 years. And so you want to go in with a mindset of experimentation to expect that trial and error. The last part, part 4. It's another set of outcomes. I wanted to separate these because our reflex, a lot of our training, the training that I had personally earlier in my career, often starts or is limited to, for me, it was limited to think about your internal customer. Think about the ROI for the corporation. Think about that business impact. Those are the outcomes. Those are these overarching outcomes. That's fantastic stuff. But in a deliberate way, you want to incorporate, you want to include in your initiative a set of organizational outcomes like these elements here. You really want to look for, keep track of, check the box, measure however you want to do it, the fact that you're aligning the teams, individuals, and stakeholders. You want to look at the new processes that need to be established. You want to come up with your own list of things that you anticipate will need to evolve and change. And you want to see within that party how many of those you've accomplished. You want to see how the organization recommends you set that up for subsequent changes. The next two are very similar. You've brought this group collectively together, this cross-functional team. And I tell you, if EBAs and these parties are good at one or two things, accelerated requirements gathering and solutioning is at the top, right? It is really good at bringing the individuals together and figuring out exactly what we need to do and making decisions right there. It's super quick. That will be very empowering to the organization. Expect and look for the teams to have an outline of how to do that again and again. You want to look and see what parts of that process you want to continue with as a deliberate organizational outcome. For many organizations, that end-to-end requirements gathering can take months. Go meet with this team, meet with the next team. Here's something new, go back to talk to the first one. It's just this waterfall process that we might not see it that way, but takes all these cycles and takes weeks and months. And when you work through these parties or this kind of format, you solve it. So the organizational outcome you look for is to document exactly how that worked, maybe some other things around the edges that might help facilitate doing that again next time, because all of the participants will want to continue to work that way. So the requirements gathering and the decision making. The last point gets back to skills and expertise that I mentioned with sponsorship, right? These are incredible opportunities. And I think what you want to do, what we have found effective, is to put people in the place to have hands-on learning as they go through these migrations, whether they're sitting side by side to colleagues of theirs, whether they're sitting side by side of an AWS partner you're working with, or an AWS domain expert that's participating as well. Set out with a goal of a certain amount of hours because you are advancing the skills of everybody who participates. And it's the technical skills of hands-on working with the services. It's also the soft skills of the intercommunication between teams, the collaboration, the problem solving between teams, the facilitating teams. There's a lot going on. So look for and expect and include targets around how much training, how much learning you can accomplish through these events. So keep in mind, these things are all happening together through all stages of the few days we work together and the bit of time that we plan. So think about that for yourselves as well. You've heard about how EEBA, or I've described how EEBA combines all of these elements as this foundation to accelerate or unblock. I want to give you one thought here. When I talk with customers, one-on-one, or I'm in venues like this, I never refer to something, EEBA, as something we invented. I refer to it as something we discovered. You know, I pointed out a couple of these elements that I said, if you ask a random person from AWS, here's what they'll probably say about the importance of executive alignment and commitment. Any one of these elements isn't overly complex. It's the combination that really winds up being the powerful part. From nose to tail, each of these elements in each of the parts that I just described. It took us 1.5 years. I said our team was a little over 4.5 years old. We truly spent the first 18 months experimenting until sitting outside a customer in Germany, we looked at each other and said, you know what, I think that worked. I think we've done this a second time now. I think we hit it. It took us 18 months to figure out something that would deliver the results and actually empower the organization to be able to continue on with that after we left. And that's a bar we set for ourselves, and something we really strive for is that this is something all organizations can do on their own. Now, if you embark on this and you put these elements together, it looks different, it feels different. This is a photo from a migration party. We've actually started doing these in person. We had 2 in-person ones last week. We did have a couple in-person ones in another country at the end of last year. This team was actually, this company we were working with was actually fairly siloed. And so in terms of looking different, that doesn't mean just co-locating silos in a common area. These teams that you see represented here between application and security and COE and platform, they actually have cross-functional representation at those tables, talking through the issues and needs. And so as they're working together, When something comes up, they're not opening up a ticket. They're getting up and walking across the room and saying, okay, here's what I need for this control or this policy or this aspect of automation and testing and release. And that was very different from how this organization worked. It wasn't so comfortable for many of them. And that's okay. Sometimes things that are new are uncomfortable. There's probably a point in time every other week I'm uncomfortable. We're generally uncomfortable when we're learning something new. And that's okay. And in these events, these actually help people work through that. And it's all comfortable by the end. Let me give you a specific example. In a migration party similar to this one, there was a question came up on the second day from one of the application teams. One of the application teams decided they wanted input from the CIO, who wasn't one of the cross-functional stakeholders that needed to be in the room. The app team wanted input from the CIO that would help them to make decision A or decision B for a particular aspect of their modernization. So hey, we're working on something that's relevant for that CIO. We know exactly how it's going to impact the business and the relevant goals. We're a large group of people trying to work together on this specific goal, which is pretty audacious, to migrate and modernize in these 3 days. So we get on the phone and we've got an audience for the CIO. They said 20 or 30 minutes, they'll be right down. And almost immediately after that was set up, one of the participants came up to me and said, hey, you know, it's not going to work exactly like that. The way it works here is we have to write up a little brief, even if it's just a half a page, and we have to put the context of what it is that we want to talk about. And if we don't have a specific recommendations, we want to outline the pros and cons of different things that might be considered. And hey, because it's in this domain, we actually need this manager over here to review that. And then there's another director we need to have. And you know, we normally send this 2 days in advance so that the CIO can read it ahead of time, maybe have a pre-question to send back, but otherwise be prepared to have a good constructive conversation. That is not what was going to happen. 30 minutes later, 8 of us walked outside this room into the little kitchenette area, which is not normally where the CIO meetings occurred, but that worked for us for this little stand-up. And half the group that walked out, you could see it on their body language. They were not comfortable with how this was going down. They just weren't used to working with that level of management and having an active conversation processing basically the situation in real time and the choices. But 30 minutes later, the application team really had a clear sense of guidance that they were looking for. They went back in the room. A day and a half later, they met their goals. About 10 minutes later, to a person, each of the participants who were out in the kitchenette area were saying to their colleagues, you know, this is exactly the way we should do it all the time. It was just that productive for forum, that rewarding. It's equally rewarding for leadership to be involved in that because they really see how they can enable teams to be in a position for success and how they can help. So it feels different. Just expect it and help people through it. So if this looks like something that's interesting, something that you might want to apply as you go back to your offices, or something that you might want to apply if you run into a similar situation with these kind of blockers later on. Working through this is really a 4-step process. And that 4-step process is not an all or none thing. These are each 2-way doors. So each one of these will give you a piece of value, give you an opportunity to say, am I headed in the right direction or is there something else to do instead? So step 1, the executive alignment. That's most of the part 1 that I described about sponsorship, right? You want to go through that 1, maybe 2 business outcomes that are critical to that leadership level and the respective IT goals and those KPIs. Let's take the conversation a little bit further. Let's go into that executive's view of the target capability he or she wants for the organization. A year from now, I want my organization, I want my teams to be able to do X. We can't do that today. You want to understand that perspective. You want to understand, conversely, are there things that leadership wants to leave behind in terms of capability? You also want to cover stakeholder mapping. Have their view of all the people who need to be represented. They'll have a different perspective of other people, other teams, other leaders that should have a representation as you bring those cross-functional teams together. Step 2 is where the heavy lift of aligning the teams occurs. So it's a readiness assessment. It's bringing those stakeholders together. It's bringing them together in a way where you assess as a team, where are we today? And given what we have heard from the leadership in terms of those target outcomes, the connection to specific goals and strategies and tactics and KPIs and target capability, where is it we need to get to? I often tell people, sometimes you can look at cloud like this 1,000 step process, from swiping your credit card to open up account on step 1 to having that cloud native application or migrated application at step 1,000. There are a lot of things to go do. But that doesn't mean success is get to step 1,000. Success is get to the step that's the point at which you can actually show and demonstrate that value back to delivering on that IT goal or that business outcome. And so through this readiness assessment, through your own readiness assessment or one that you work on with us or one of your partners, that's what you're after. And because the foundation of that is this defined business outcome and those goals, you're going to be doing the heavy lift of aligning the teams to get them all on the same page, so that as you develop a roadmap of activities, of critical path items of what you need to do to get to step 420, because that's success, all the teams will be on the same page. That's step 2. And you know, there are times we work through step 2, and you know what? An EBA party is not the next thing to do. There's something else to do first. And that's okay. That's why these are all two-way doors. You have something incredibly of value after step 2. You have aligned teams and you've got that roadmap. Step 3, that's doing the fun stuff. That's delivering the workload. Step 3 is apply an acceleration mechanism. That's parts 2, 3, and 4 of that success pattern I described. Actually, it's all the parts, because elements of sponsorship continue on in delivering those cloud outcomes, deploying those workloads. So whether you pick our acceleration mechanism, using EBA on your own, calling your field team to work with us on an EBA, or calling your partner representatives to work on an EBA, or if you're applying your own acceleration mechanism, or an acceleration mechanism you've gotten from somebody else, this is where you really apply the guts of that and deploy those workloads in that aggressive timeline. And in that notion of starting before you have a final plan, I'll say for a lot of organizations, as they get moving, as they begin this work, it feels a little early. There are a lot of times we hear from organizations, you know, 1 more week of planning. Some organizations want another month. It's like, wait, if we had another week, we'd be in better shape. For most teams, it feels just a little bit too early. And that's okay. You are going to have everybody you need to get things done as you get going. The last step is obviously the look back. It's validating the outcomes, really being self-critical on how well you achieved those outcomes you set out to, how impactful they were compared to the plan, taking the data you've collected about how the work was performed and incorporating that into the new business plan or a revised business plan or a revised operating plan and figuring it out from there. So in closing, I'll add one final practice or thought, and that's the top point. If you find yourself with a need to accelerate, whether it's a market catalyst, whether it's an executive CEO vision and strategy that's coming down, or whether it's a project that's behind, if you find yourself stuck in the ways of working that have kind of led you to getting stuck, haven't been able to get you out, The first step in both of those is to make a decision to accelerate or make a decision to change the way you work. And that's a decision that you control. That's really where it starts. So from there, if you find yourself in that position or looking for some of those opportunities, identify the target business outcome you want to go after, start the journey, adopt an acceleration method, work differently, which is at the root of all of those things, all of how those elements come together, and have fun. My name is Scott Benz. We started with Danny Netto, my colleague from the EEBA team. Thank you very much for your time today. Please enjoy a great summit for the rest of the 2 days.